Real quick, before I start this video, I would like to give a very big shout out to Clover Okami and Spider-Man3231 on Twitter. Without them, I would not be making this video right now, let alone playing the beta. For some reason, my Resident Evil Ambassador status never got sent over to my CAPCOM ID, or something rather, so I'm not exactly sure. But thank you so much for sparing me a code. You guys really rock, and you guys really made me feel some kind of camaraderie in the Resident Evil community, and it really tugged on my heartstrings. Thank you so much. Okay, on with the video. Resident Evil is one of the most prolific game franchises ever created, and it definitely fortified the meaning of a complete genre of video games. Resident Evil is very near and dear to my heart. This game was always been there ever since I started playing video games. It was the one game franchise I was just obsessed with. It was all I wanted to play throughout my junior high school days, and even going into high school, I was excited with every single launch that they had come out with. I was a die-hard fanboy, and I still am. But in my eyes, Capcom could do no wrong when it came to Resident Evil back then. You say Resident Evil 6 was bad because it was just a casual run-and-gun third-person shooter? I bite my thumb at you, sir. Resident Evil 6 is action horror at its finest, I say. What? Never heard of Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles? Have you no taste, my friend? What am I gonna do? Rail shooters have never been the same since that bad boy came out, and its much better sister title, The Dark Side Chronicles, will give all you lore junkies something to rub on about, let me tell ya. Wow. And don't even get me started on Resident Evil 5, Umbrella Corps, and Operation Raccoon City. I think you guys get it. I was truly a fanboy at heart. But now that I'm older and I have a bit more brain under my belt where my crotch should be, I'm willing to admit where Resident Evil has its flaws. But multiplayer is just not one of them, and I think it's obvious with this new entry to the franchise, and even its past releases. This is Resident Evil RE-verse, an online multiplayer PvP game currently in its beta stages. Starring some of our most beloved Resident Evil characters, you are pitted up against each other in a familiar Resident Evil stage to rack up the most kills in a deathmatch free-for-all. Capcom recently initiated a closed beta test for this new Resident Evil title, and I had the pleasure of taking part in that beta. No, you're not crazy. That is Resident Evil 2's Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield, with Resident Evil 7's Chris Redfield, Resident Evil 3 Remake's Jill Valentine, all sitting under the same title banner. And we can't forget R2 Umbrella Pawn's Hunk and Ada Wong of Resident Evil 2 Remake fame. This may not look it to the casual fan, but this starting screen is something special. This is the first time we have seen some of our most beloved core characters all in the same game. Currently in its beta stages, the game is just a free-for-all deathmatch with focus on racking up the most kills and aiming for the top score. The characters feel like sped-up versions of their remake counterparts. Moving at double the speed, they also don a dodge roll mechanic complete with a stamina gauge and a refresh time, which makes sense. With the focus on more competitive and PvP gameplay, the mobility enhancements give the player the tools to effectively maneuver around the map to get the one-up on their enemy and use tactics and skill to win their gunfights or BOW battles. Oh, that's right, you heard me correctly, BOW battles. Now, each character comes equipped with their own weapon loadout, which I believe is corresponding to their stats, and they also have special abilities. Now, special abilities range from temporary buffs/boosts and melee attacks to counters and tactical abilities. Each character also dons their own unique passive skill, similar to that of Apex Legends or Overwatch. Can we just take a second to appreciate the attention to detail here? Even for a beta, giving each character a uniquely named passive ability unique to them just tickles my lore bone, such as Leon's Rookie Spirit or Chris's Pride of the Original 11 ability. The same thing goes for the BOW transformations. Now, the strength of the bioweapon you become is determined by the number of virus capsules you have in your possession, each getting its own 2 special abilities it can use along with normal physical attacks. And some of these are pretty freaking cool, allowing you to use familiar BOWs and their insane attacks we've all had once to come up a defense mechanism for, now are tools to fuck up our friends respectively. A quick backstory on Resident Evil's multiplayer and my personal interaction with them as a fan that grew up with the franchise. Now, imagine if you will, It's 2003. You have a nice cold brisk in your hand while walking home from school, and you pass by the local Game Crazy shop to browse the newest and upcoming game releases. And you happen to overhear these two edgy goth kids talk about how unrealistic the new Resident Evil game is. And you just fucking 180 jerk your head around, almost breaking your own goddamn neck, and frantically ask them what Resident Evil game they're talking about. That raggedy goth kid points his pale, decrepit, painted fingernail at the Game Informer inside the case, showing the release of the Resident Evil Outbreak game, a new Resident Evil game no one ever fucking heard of, apparently. In the PS2 era, we were given a very forgotten Resident Evil gem in Resident Evil Outbreak and its sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. This was the first time we were introduced to Resident Evil in a multiplayer setting. It was the core gameplay from all the original Resident Evils that we've all come to know when the series was carving its path to legendary status, before the transition to a third-person perspective. It was a series of episodic scenarios where the player had the option to go it alone or take on the survival horror with your friends. It barred tank controls and fixed camera angles, similar to that of Resident Evil Code Veronica. So OG fans found the appeal quite instantly when it came to the multiplayer Resident Evil in this game style. Any hardcore Resident Evil fan will tell you that the unfortunate fate of Capcom's first big attempt at multiplayer Resident Evil was cut short. This game was really ahead of its time, and I'm sure anyone you ask about this game will tell you the exact same thing. Because it really was. You had to work together to complete puzzles and tasks while also surviving the Raccoon City incident as a survivor of the T-Virus outbreak. At the time, you could connect to people online and take on the horrors together. And mind you, this was a time before voice chat was even a thing for console gaming, and online connectivity was still pretty new as well. But the option to play with friends worldwide was given to us for this Resident Evil iteration. And back then, it had mass appeal. That's what everyone wanted to get this game for. But no one did use it, really. I mean, over in Japan it was pretty popular, but not here. Knowledge and sales for the hardware and internet connectivity for the PS2 at the time was almost unheard of in the US. Although really popular in Japan, it never did hit the mark for us in the rest of the world. Fast forward to now, we can play this game via a fan-made server for the PC, and it definitely holds up to this date. But it still doesn't get the love it really deserves, in my opinion. Growing up, after playing all the OGs to death, I really enjoyed what Resident Evil was evolving into. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't a big fan of the transition Capcom took after Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 0 to Resident Evil 4. And anyone who knows me or has heard any of my long-winded BHD Discord rants knows how I can go on about how Resident Evil 4 is the most baseless Resident Evil ever made. But I cannot deny what it did for the franchise. I really had to learn to love Resident Evil 4 for what it was, and when I did, Resident Evil 5 had just come out, and it gave me a taste of what Resident Evil multiplayer could really be with co-op campaign and online mercenaries, along with the versus modes. Also, being able to play as my favorite character in the franchise as Stars Chris fucking tickled me pink. It was the newest model of my favorite iteration of Chris with Resident Evil 5. And I was happier than a pig in mud, I swear to fucking God. It was the coolest thing that I had ever fucking experienced in my life. In my opinion, Resident Evil 5 really actually paved the way for all future Resident Evil multiplayers. Now, I know Resident Evil 5 wasn't really classified as a survival horror game, and the concept of a multiplayer in an action-based game like Resident Evil 5 made sense. And it did work really well. But the fact that I could just be any Resident Evil character on the roster, including the villain Albert Wesker, and even old returning characters who weren't even in the core game, such as Barry Burton and Rebecca Chambers, really made me enjoy the game even more because it was appealing to my inner OG Resident Evil fan inside, and playing as them in this PvP, go for broke kind of high score modes made me want to choose even more Resident Evil characters in the franchise that I thought Capcom had long forgotten, such as Carlos Oliveira or Billy Cohen. Because you gotta remember, the last time we saw Rebecca Chambers or Barry Burton before their Resident Evil 5 cameos was in Resident Evil 1 Remake, which was released damn near a decade before Resident Evil 5. Seeing stuff like this really made me hopeful in Resident Evil's future in order to stay relevant to modern audiences. Now, I get it. RE-verse is not a canon game for all you lore diehards, but this is still very cool to see, especially considering it's something we've all been asking for a while now. All these beloved characters in one game. Well, at least I have anyway. I've seen how the community has been reacting to the announcement of this new multiplayer game, and honestly, it makes me really fucking sad. The reason why I bring up past Resident Evil multiplayers in regard of Resident Evil Reverse is because the two biggest arguments I keep seeing from the community is that Resident Evil Reverse is a multiplayer Resident Evil that no one asked for, and that Resident Evil is not a multiplayer genre game, it's for survival horror only.
It's time to stop!
Okay, this has to be the dumbest thing I have ever heard for a reason why you should not like a game or play it. And mind you, most of these arguments were made before we saw anything on the actual game aside from a very short teaser and some snippets of gameplay. To say Resident Evil is not supposed to be a multiplayer game is kind of absurd. Capcom has gone on record to say that Resident Evil is a multimedia horror franchise, which goes beyond just single-player survival horror. According to an interview with Resident Evil producer Noritaka Funimizu, the first concept of Biohazard Outbreak, as it was known originally, was known before the release of Resident Evil 2 in 1998. With growing interest in the concept of network gaming over consoles, Shinji Mikami, the director of the first Resident Evil, Daddy RE himself, suggested that Funimizu that he should really try looking into this concept and make it a reality for Resident Evil 2, as he could not do it for the original Resident Evil 1. Early on in the design, he even made a small multiplayer minigame in which the player had to survive it the longest time possible. Resident Evil had always had multiplayer in mind when it came to playability, and I think that's really important to remember when looking at all these attempts at Resident Evil multiplayers as a whole. The fanbase has really never given it a chance other than Resident Evil Outbreak, and even then, it wasn't even received successfully after the first one. I do believe part of the problem for online Resident Evil multiplayer games is that the fanbase already writes it off as a bad game because it doesn't focus heavily on its horror aspects, rather than the game's characters or its world or its gunplay or wide arsenal of weapons that would work in these scenarios, along with its story enemies and BOWs. Not every Resident Evil has to be strictly focused on horror. I mean, yeah, it is a multimedia horror franchise, but sometimes the narrative could just be to push the lore, just like in Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and the Dark Side Chronicles, where they were rail shooters that weren't really focused on the horror aspects, but rather used horror elements to further push the story along. And those games really filled in some gaps that were really big in the Resident Evil timeline. And guess what? They were multiplayer Resident Evil games, and they were pretty well received. I saw people in the community shitting so hard on this game before it was even released, saying that this is why Resident Evil is dying and stuff like Capcom never listens to its fans. I seriously hate reading this shit. As a Resident Evil fan, I just want us all to enjoy more Resident Evil content from the source. I understand most of us have conflicting opinions when it comes to Resident Evil titles. There are fans who enjoy the OG trilogy of games and that's it. And there are also fans who only played Resident Evil 4 and up and have never played the original Resident Evils and love the franchise just as much as any other fan does. Hell, I recently found out there are fans of the game who came in at Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 7. And that just blows my mind. But all these fans have something in common. They're all experienced Resident Evil in its core form when it comes to the survival horror. But not only that, they also have been exposed to the multiplayer aspect when it comes to Resident Evil. OG fans got it with Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 and 2, and new fans got it with Resident Evil Resistance and now Resident Evil Reverse. But the fans who came in after Resident Evil 4 and beyond got the truest form of Resident Evil multiplayers out of any fans, with Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil Umbrella Corps, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles, Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2, and Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles. And if you're anything like me, you're a fan of all of these games collectively. Now, I'm just saying, it's okay to not like any of these games. I'm not saying that you can't be a Resident Evil fan and not like all of its games. All I'm saying is that experiencing Resident Evil with other like-minded fans is really fun to me. I think it's cool how we can all just come and be connected to one franchise and love all these characters and their stories and the struggles they've endured together. So why not have a fun offshoot game where we can play as our favorite Resident Evil characters and just blast each other in high-paced combat, dude? A lot of people are big advocates for this, to be fair, and it's obvious I'm one of them. I love competitive ranked shooters, and I'm always down to show off my major league gamer skills, and I fucking adore Resident Evil, so the mixture of the two is really appealing to me. Why would I not want to pull off a 360 no-scope as Chris Redfield? That's fucking amazing. And I really don't get this fan base. You guys are a bunch of horny fucks. You guys get to choose your favorite fucking waifu, fucking husbando, and fucking wreck shit. And a lot of you are fucking BOW stands too. In this game, when you die, you can turn into one of these many BOWs and wreck shit with attacks and abilities like we've never been able to before. It's awesome. I don't understand the hate, really. But I digress. Maybe I'm just butthurt that something that I've wanted personally since Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries has finally come true, and the whole fan base has just counted it out and wrote it off, and hasn't even given it a chance. Now, I'll admit, so far about half of the fanbase has started singing a different tune, and a lot of people are really enjoying the game. I've streamed once so far, and then all I've got was love for the gameplay in my chat. I hope this continues, to be honest. It'll show Capcom that the fans actually do want a multiplayer Resident Evil. They just don't know it yet. And I think Resident Evil RE-verse has the potential to be that solution. It just needs the care and attention to make sure it is what Capcom wants it to be. My hopes for the game is that when the full release does come out, we will see a lot of features that can breathe life and longevity into the game to continue even after the release of Resident Evil Village, such as releasing characters over time into the game and new BOWs and updating skins for our beloved Resident Evil characters. You know, like replacing Resident Evil 7 Chris's skin with Resident Evil Revelations 1 Chris's skin. Cause this one's just bad. Like, come on, Capcom. You had like 6 different designs of Chris Redfield to choose from, and this is the one you went with? Like, quit trying to push this Redfield on us. Just stop. To be honest, I assume it's because he already had an RE engine in-game model, but that's just a theory. I don't think a lot of people are understanding that Resident Evil RE-verse is an opportunity for us to see a lot of returning faces from the Resident Evil franchise. Resident Evil is famous for its characters. There is such a huge, and I mean huge, roster of Resident Evil characters. And I can't tell you how many posts the fanbase sees when it comes to seeing missing Resident Evil characters that they want to see make a return. Just remember, guys, this could potentially be their opportunity to come back in the RE engine. Capcom has the ability to win over a very large majority of its own Resident Evil fanbase just by reintroducing old Resident Evil characters. And I firmly believe that, such as Art Thompson or Sheva Olimar. Hell, even Bruce McGivern can make a return as a potential character. If Capcom wants this to be their definitive multiplayer game, they need to have the same mindset akin to that of Overwatch or Apex Legends, where introducing new characters monthly or skins and new stages can really entice new and old fans alike, especially old ones if you bring back the right characters and settings. And to be honest, I'm confident that adding other game modes will also entice other players to explore the opportunity that RE-verse can bring when it comes to enjoying Resident Evil with your friends and family. Now, that's not to say that Resident Evil RE-verse is without its faults. It's very much still in its beta stages, and I do think there is a lot of room for improvement. Some minor things I did see was hitboxes being too large, or broken attacks that still hit you while you're downed and stuck in a getting up animation. And for the love of God, please add an aiming sensitivity adjustment. It is way too slow and clunky the way it is now, and it doesn't make for a good competitive aiming system. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we all love Resident Evil, and we all want to see it do well. We all love horror. We all love the characters and this franchise, and some of us like playing together in this horror-themed world that Resident Evil has built, because we just love playing as our favorite Resident Evil characters who have left these huge impacts on us, whether we grew up with them or they just plain spoke to us. Same goes for the BOWs too. As a community, don't we just all want Resident Evil to thrive and do well? A lot of us like Resident Evil multiplayers, and I don't think you should count out Resident Evil RE-verse just yet. In the end, open your mind and just enjoy the world of Resident Evil, and enter the world of survival horror with Resident Evil RE-verse. That's all I've got. There it is. Dinner's done. Thank you guys for watching. I know this was a long-winded rant basically, but I do appreciate you sticking to the end. If you guys like Resident Evil and are fans of all things survival horror, go check out Biohazard Declassified on YouTube and on Facebook. We are a team of dedicated fans of Resident Evil, always trying to bring you the latest and the greatest in Resident Evil news and survival horror related content. That is the end of this video.